the reality of what you're facing when it comes to Manchester City. You know, who they are, who's in charge, how they've been built, what resources they have. The reality is that they are basically the best team in the world, have been for a long time, and probably will continue to be that until Pep Guardiola decides to go somewhere else, and even then they'll replace him with another brilliant manager who will have a lot of money to spend. You're basically seeking perfection to outdo them, and perfection is extremely difficult to achieve.
We are within touching distance of, and I don't like to be hyperbolic, the single most important match of this young Premier League season. A clash of civilizations, top of the table, four-peat seeking Manchester City travel to the Emirates to face a still unbeaten Arsenal side. It's barely October, but this Gabriel Jesus Memorial Derby could impact which team ultimately hoists a certain £55 trophy come late May. And I want to talk seriously about all there is to come with today's guest, a joyous, soulful, deeply insightful gent who said that Arsenal's last-minute win in the 1979 FA Cup final introduced him to, quote, the joy and terror induced by football, turning his early experiences as a teenage pirate radio DJ into a full-throated, fanatical and empathetic worldwide community based around the love of his life, Arsenal Football Club. This gent launched a quite incredible Arseblog back in 2002. Yes, 4 presidents, 87 prime ministers, and at least 400 Marvel superhero films ago, and followed that with the Arsecast and Arsecast Extra podcast. Scrolling through or listening to those archives, and encourage everyone to do that, is to experience really everything that's great about football. A borderline Shakespearean range of highs and lows, celebrations, and mournful nights of despair of both Invincibles and Sebastian Squillaci's in equal measure on the eve of Arsenal's dance with destiny. Welcome back, Mr. Andrew Mangan.
Hi, Raj. That's pretty epic intro right there. I don't think I've ever been talked up to such a big fashion, but I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I feel like I taught you down, Andrew. Thought I did you dirty. That was barely hyperbolic at all. But last time I saw you, Andrew, in person, it was last season, April this year. You were actually in Manhattan. A glorious Arsenal was still top of the table, about to play West Ham away, I think. Really now what we know as the beginning of the end in terms of the title aspirations. But when we had an afternoon beer, Arsenal was still 4 points above City. They had a match in hand given. And we were chatting beautifully about how you felt about this really remarkable transformative moment, the title chances for Arsenal. And I loved, even then, you told me, you were like, I don't care. That was pretty well your attitude. You were like, what I've seen, the joy I've already experienced, that's enough. And I've got to tell you, Andrew, I couldn't love you more or your approach to watching football. But here we are again, and you mentioned, Arsenal against Manchester City and your hopes going into that game last season. We are just 4 short days away from City's visit to the Emirates, the first Premier League matchup between these two teams since April, when City surged. They didn't get that draw, your beautiful Arsenal. It was a 4-1 defeat. Taking another 3-point City there during an unshakable, relentless late-season march to their 3rd straight Premier League title. And going into Sunday's game, the unbeaten Gunners sit in 3rd place after a convincing 4-0 win at Bournemouth. City still top, yes, but coming in after a loss at Molineux when Hwang Hee-chan, Guardiola referred to him before the game as the Korean guy, went full Destiny's Child, practically screaming, say my name, as he belted Wolves' winning goal. Andrew, big picture, how are you feeling? How is Arsenal Nation feeling as we hurtle towards this match?
I think perhaps a little concerned because the team, despite the fact they've been unbeaten in the Premier League this season, hasn't been without issues. Like last season, we got going and we just sort of steamrollered our way through. We built real momentum and real goodwill very early on. This time around, some of the performances haven't been brilliant. Dropped a couple of points at home against Fulham. There's some questions about who's going to be available for Sunday. Bukayo Saka seemed to pick up an injury in midweek, and that's a bit of a concern because of just how good he is. There is the ongoing Kai Havertz conundrum. Is Gabriel Martinelli going to be available? Things like that. So there's, I think, some trepidation, not least because it's Manchester City as well. You know, we're all very happy that Rodri finally got a red card and will miss this game. But if that's then chalked off by the absence of Saka, you know, it makes you a little nervous.
So a little nervous. Is that how you describe your mood
I
as you
would
approach
say
this
so.
game?
Yeah, there's like people. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of everyone. I can't speak on
You
behalf
can.
of Arsenal. No,
Andrew, you can.
I can only speak on behalf of myself. And you know, I think we've done well.
By the way, and the rational thinking person's world, you can take that mantle, Andrew.
Sure. I mean, I'm aware of what people are saying. I think there's a general sense that this is you know, an opportunity for Arsenal, perhaps, but one where we're going to have to show a little bit more than we have done so far this season, where it's going to have to be one of our better performances of the season. I think that's natural anyway when you play Manchester City, just because of how good they are. When you come that close and when you get to the point where you're thinking, well, if we can just get another couple of wins here and just maybe get a draw against City and then just see out that run in, of course it hurt. Absolutely, you know. But if you ask me what I prefer, would I like a season like that where you come close and don't get over the line, or one where you finish 8th and you're like, we have got so much to do. There's so much to do at this football club. You know, I'm not enjoying the football, the performances. I don't like most of the players. You know, I much prefer what we got last season because there's just so much to sort of fill your heart, if you like. And we've talked about this a bit before, where football, as important as it is a distraction from the real world. And the real world is so abjectly terrible at this moment in time that, you know, if I can lean into my football club playing well at a weekend and William Saliba defends well and Martin Odegaard creates something and Gabriel Jesus, and I'm looking at a football pitch and going, why is Alexander Zinchenko there? What's happening here? It's so much more fulfilling as a football fan than everything else. But does it hurt when you don't get over the line? Yes, because ultimately you want those trophies, you want to scratch those itches that, as an Arsenal fan, particularly in terms of the Premier League, it's been a very itchy itch for 20 years now, and it needs a good scratching. And we came so close last season.
Yeah, we have to acknowledge, and you've hinted at this, we are slightly reeling into this one. Arsenal, Champions League, slightly self-pooping, in Lons, and worse than a defeat, beautiful Bukayo Saka. He, of 87 consecutive Premier League starts, limping off in the 34th minute. Genuinely an agony for every Arsenal fan and for anyone that likes joy, Ewoks, rainbows, unicorns. Arteta said, quote, "It does not look good." I mean, why was he playing him? Such a, in the scheme of things, a meaningless game. I do not know. You know, even if the player himself has that kind of Alexis Sanchez mentality of wanting to play every minute of every game, it's got to be said, Arsenal look so much more missionary position without their star boy.
There's an image. Look, I don't think...
Fabio Vieira, missionary position.
There's another image. Thank you, Raj. Appreciate that. I don't think the midweek game was meaningless per se, but I think it's one where perhaps Mikel Arteta should have looked at what's coming this weekend and said, look, Saka's taken a few kicks in the last couple of weeks. He's limped off the pitch in the last game. He even said himself he took a big knock. That was on Saturday, and on Tuesday he's playing again. I do wonder if, with hindsight, he might have said, you know what, I could start this game without Bukayo Saka, but he's so good that if I need him, I can stick him on for 30 minutes and maybe not run the risk of what happened the other night. It looks like a muscular thing. We'll have to wait and see. But again, I sort of understand why when the option on the right-hand side is Fabio Vieira, you go with Bukayo Saka, which isn't to be dismissive of Vieira. I think he's been quite good this season, but usually from central areas. He's more effective when he's playing more central. I don't think he's quite the right profile of player for the right-hand side. He had Reece Nelson available, I suppose, as well. He could have used him. And I think it's one of those where a manager takes a risk and has paid the price a little bit for it. A bit like Pep Guardiola saying the Korean guy in his press conference, and that coming back to bite him. Mikel Arteta might think, I could have done something a little bit different with Bukayo Saka for this game, particularly with City on the horizon.
God, yeah. I mean, Arsenal without Bukayo Saka, they're a bit like Inter Miami without Lionel Messi. But despite a trio of wins in the Community Shield and the FA Cup, Arsenal have not beaten Manchester City in the Premier League since bloody hell December 2015. A game when City's backline may have understandably been distracted by the unfathomable beauty of Olivier Giroud's achingly sharp cheekbones. The Gunners did manage to summon a 1-1 draw in August Community Shield, ultimately winning on penalties, prompting once goalkeeper Aaron Ramsdale to call the match a marker that we can beat Manchester City in a big game when it matters. Bless. Adding that any mental block has now gone. Oh, it was the Community Shield, Andrew. It's not exactly the Florida Cup, is it? But it is the memory of that match that lingers. Is it enough to carry over into Sunday? Is it enough to exercise any kind of Erling Haaland-sized demons?
I guess the proof will be in the pudding on Sunday. I don't think you can really look at the Community Shield and see it as comparable to any of the Premier League games that we've played. But I'm pretty sure that going into this game, Mikel Arteta, or that game, Arteta would have told his players, this is Man City. If you can beat Man City, you can beat Man City. In the grand scheme of things, does it mean much? No, but perhaps when you're looking for tiny marginal gains, a percentage of confidence, a percentage of self-belief, a percentage of extra vim or whatever it is when it comes to this game on Sunday, maybe it will help. I mean, I think the fact is it's a friendly really, and it's a nice friendly, but Arteta takes all of it very, very seriously. So I hope we can see something from that game in this one. I mean, it's quite interesting to consider how Arsenal actually approached that game in the first half an hour, 40 minutes. They just let Man City have the ball, and Man City had the ball and did nothing with it. I'm not sure that that's going to be the approach on Sunday. I'm not sure it can be the approach on Sunday when you're playing at home and when there's a crowd behind you and an expectation. I don't think you can just sort of sit off. Perhaps that was like early season tactics. I think the tactics on Sunday will have to be different, and whether or not they can execute the game plan against City on Sunday will depend, I think, a lot on who's going to be available.
When you look at Manchester City, Andrew, this Manchester City, Haaland, this ChatGPT in cleats, Phil Foden, human hand grenade, Jack Grealish, English Travis Kelce, Bernardo Silva, just casual scorer of massive goals in massive moments in massive games, on and on and on. And I know they just lost to Wolves, but I think they only did that to try and persuade us that despite being robot overlords, they have human vulnerabilities, which they don't. Arsenal have now lost 12 straight Premier League games to City. Do you see a squad that your Arsenal can beat? Like, do you see a pathway? I'm an Everton fan. Every game I just see only loss. Even when we rolled it, Luton, I'm like, oh my God, we are so effed here. So I can't humanly emote here. Do you look at this game and think, I can see pathways? Yes, we got this. Or does a little bit of you feel like a bit like Dwight Schrute, knowing he'll always be eclipsed by Jim Halpert?
Well, I've got no idea who those two people are. But
The Office, Andrew.
Sorry.
Did you dodge it? Are you just like a British Office person?
I'm not even a British Office person, to be honest. So, sorry about that.
You're not even an Office person of any kind, are you?
No.
Self-employed Andrew Mangan doesn't want your Office crap, America. Go on.
Anyway, I think that the squad is better placed than it was. When you look through the spine of the team and you can see Gabriel Jesus, Martin Odegaard, Declan Rice, William Saliba, Gabriel, Ben White, Alexander, Arsenal have got good players and they've got a much better and deeper squad than they have done for a number of years. I'll go back to the game against Man City on January 1st. I think it was 2022, and Mikel Arteta missed that game with COVID. And Arsenal were brilliant that day. And that was almost like a turning point in how people thought about this team and what they were capable of. Because you think about a game against Man City, it's like, right, well, hang on in there and maybe we can nick a goal. And Arsenal were brilliant until we went down to 10 men. And even then, it took a late goal from Rodri to take all 3 points. But I think Arsenal were very good that day. And I think the Arsenal of today, in terms of the squad depth, the increased maturity of some of the players, is better than it was back then. I think City are probably just as good as they were back then, maybe better, given the fact they have Haaland and what he can do. But if the last couple of years have been about like closing the gap in terms of the squad and the squad depth, I think that has been done. Whether it's sufficient to beat City on Sunday, whether we can elicit a performance or not, I don't know. But I would feel more confident with this group of players than I would have done with that group of players on January 1st, 22.
I love you. I love your approach. I had so many Arsenal fans I do know. I always admire constantly. Often, by the way, in the face of no evidence whatsoever, their eternal optimism. I've got a friend who I'll refer to in a minute, Michael Cohen, not that Michael Cohen, huge Arsenal fan. And just like in history over time, like Thierry Henry leaves, I feel bereft for him. I'll phone him up. He'll be like, we're RVP's team now. And then RVP will leave. We'll be like, we're Cesk's team now. And, we're just constantly finding bright sides all the bloody time. Even in dark times when I'll say, I'm so sorry, Michael, call up, don't worry, Manchester United are crap in the bed. I just love that. It makes me feel better than when Arsenal win. Like, always finding bright sides. As an Everton fan, as I say, it has been so long that I've had any hope in football that I really am drawn to renewed hope in other teams. And I admire this Arsenal over the past, 2 seasons so immensely, humanly. Is there a single thing as you approach Manchester, a single thing, a single player that gives you the most hope in this game?
I mean, I would say Saka because of his ability.
Andrew.
I know, and I'm maybe setting myself up for disappointment
Andrew.
here because he may not be available.
Oh, Andrew.
But I wonder as well if this game could be controlled through midfield, and I think Declan Rice could be massive in this fixture. I think he could be absolutely huge in this fixture, and I think he has settled in so quickly and become so important and taken on so much responsibility. We saw it last in the game in midweek in the Champions League, where it wasn't going particularly well for Arsenal, but he wanted the ball all the time. He tried to drive the team forward. It didn't really click. And I just think that extra bit of personality in midfield, and is like, I have to say, I've been really, really, not really surprised. That's wrong. But I've been pleasantly surprised by how technically well he has fitted into the team. Like, he's got quicker feet than I thought he did. And between his physical presence and between the sort of the personality he has on the pitch, I do wonder if he might be the guy who could sort of glue things together, whether Saka's there or not.
God, I do. With Declan Rice, watching him, it's fascinating. I think this game will revolve around how far forward Arteta is willing to allow him to venture and focus. Like, the further forward you can get this man, I think the further forward Arsenal can hurt their opponents. But, so much of this does revolve, both, I think, yes, in our imaginations, but also, yes, in reality, around these managers. They are the obvious storyline, really an epic novel, Dickensian almost in their own right. Arsenal manager Mikel Arteta, that long, rich history with Pep Guardiola that goes all the way back to Barcelona. 15-year-old Arteta, Pep's midfield understudy, before Arteta was called to bring his impenetrable, unyielding hairline in as an assistant at Manchester City's coaching staff in 2016. Two managers have faced each other 10 times since Arteta arrived at Arsenal. Pep, stunning numbers. He's won 8 of those meetings. Arteta undoubtedly has a deep respect for Pep, but he's got to feel a little bit like the Saltieri to Pep's Mozart, the Lockie to his Thor, the Solange to his Beyonce. How do you understand the relationship, the deep, almost symbiotic relationship between these two men?
I mean, I guess it's built on a sort of huge passion for the game, a huge passion for finding ways of playing the game that might be slightly different to the norm, if you like. Whether that comes from the Barcelona grounding, I'm not sure. Arteta feels like a bit of an obsessive to me in many ways. I don't know if that's true off the pitch, but I think his football journey is quite an interesting one when you think about Barcelona and what you get there when you grow up in La Masia, and the grounding you get in this sort of Cruyffian footballing philosophy. And then you go to PSG, and then you go to, I think, Rangers, and from Rangers you go to Everton, and from Everton you come to Wenger's Arsenal. Like David Moyes' Everton and Arsene Wenger's Arsenal, there are some subtle differences there between how those two managers played and approached the game, right? Very subtle, I know. We don't have time to go into all of that right now. But I think all of those things, the cocktail of that from Arteta's perspective, along with Pep's, like if you've read any of the books that Pep have been written about Pep, you know what sort of a mindset he has. And I think Arteta has a similar kind of mindset as well, in that they are absolutely obsessed with playing football well, winning football matches, dominating football. Arteta's, one of his mantras throughout is about how they want to improve, how they want to be the best. He wants to be the best, Mikel Arteta. He wants his team to be the best. He wants Arsenal to be the best it can be. And I think that's a huge fire under your arse, if you like, when you're thinking about how to build a squad. And I think that the two guys, Guardiola and Arteta, are very similar in that regard. There's a sort of tunnel vision that manifests itself in strange ways from time to time when they're talking to the press or when they make decisions about football. There's almost an idea that, like, this is up here. Like, you guys, you love football, you watch football, and we're a bit up here in that. And that's good and bad, I think. You can maybe feel a little bit patronized at times by Pep in particular. But I think it's a shared passion for football as an experience and as a thing to enjoy. And the thing that brings you the most enjoyment, of course, is winning. But I also think they both like the idea of the opposition suffering as well, because of how they approach things. Like, you don't go into that kind of minute tactical detail just so you can win. It's so you can step on the neck of the opponent too.
We had the tennis player Medvedev come on this show, and he talked about something that I think about when I do think about that mentality, that Pep mentality, that Arteta mentality, or the mentality that that Arteta aspires to truly, fully manifest at Arsenal, where he says, ultimately, I'm not sure I can beat you all the time, but I know I can suffer more than you can. So I pull you into my own world of hurt, I will outlast you. And, talking about worlds of hurt and talking about Arteta, he really comes within a context of Arsenal's modern history, which is really the spine of Arscast narrative. You supporters, I look at you, and I'm an Everton fan. We have suffered. You have suffered. I respect it. I really do. Legendary manager, sworn foe to all long zippers. Arsene Wenger retired at the end of 2018. Arsenal almost appointed Mikel Arteta as a successor then. I think the deal was so close. He was seen house shopping in North London, but then at the last minute, club opted for, we want experience. Unai Emery, which is fascinating to think about right now. A bright start, granted, couldn't be sustained by an unsettled, deeply unmotivated side that frequently looked about as creative as hotel art. He was sacked November 2019, almost kicked to the curb amidst scorn. Arsenal languishing in 8th place, who also ran mild in their longest winless run since 1992. It seems so bloody hopeless. And in one of that season's bleakest moments, Captain Granit Xhaka told his own supporters, the faithful at Arsenal, to, quote, F off. Andrew, we'll talk about what's happened since then, because it is glorious. By the way, I think it's genuinely like almost what's happened to Arsenal. It's like a bloody Greek epic poem without truly the culminating return to Carthage yet. But how did you sustain your faith during those 18 months? How difficult was it in that time to see a way out of the darkness? Could you?
I mean, that's the thing about football, is that stuff can change really quickly. Like one season a team can barely escape relegation. The next, they're doing things that you never thought about. Look, they were dark times. I'm not saying, I'm trying to give you some hope there as well, by the way. There were dark times, no question about it. And I don't think it was just that 18 months. It was like the end of the Arsene Wenger era was very fractious. I think Arsenal had to hit a kind of rock bottom in order to change the trajectory. And if our rock bottom was 8th in the Premier League, then that's not too bad in the grand scheme of things. It's not to say it was fun or enjoyable or anything like that. It just wasn't. There were terrible decisions made, bad decisions made, hands-off owners who didn't really pay attention to what was going on and what was happening. And the team and the club and the fan base and everyone who loves Arsenal suffered for that. No two ways about it. It was horrible. Nobody enjoyed it. But you always know that things come around again. Football is cyclical, that you can hit that rock bottom and from there you can make your way back up, and it might take a while, and it did take a while. Maybe didn't happen quite as quickly as people might have liked, but there was that whole, global pandemic thing, which, was tough for everyone to deal with, not least football and football clubs and football fans. So it was difficult, and it was a mess of the club's own making to a large extent because of just how things had been allowed to fester. And then Unai Emery came in, wrong man at the wrong time. He really was. He's doing great work at Aston Villa and fair play. But he wasn't the right man. He wasn't the right personality. But maybe if you're saying you need a guy between Wenger and the next guy who's going to be good, that's an important role. I'm sure it's one he probably didn't consider he would play. But I think sometimes you need the end of that legacy manager. The next guy comes in, and that gives you more time to properly assess what's wrong and what needs to be fixed, and more importantly, how it needs to be fixed. And that's been evident under Mikel Arteta, because the first thing he did when he came in is said, standards, I'm paraphrasing, standards are low. We need to bring this club back. Everyone's got to, pull in the right direction. We've all got to live together in the right way to get this football club back to where we want it to be. And it's a process which people, used as a bit of a stick to beat him with. It is a process. It is a process to rebuild and reshape a football club in the image that you want. A process that involves time, lots of money, maybe a bit of good fortune along the way, but good recruitment, good tactics, and things have changed since. And here we are.
I mean, he came in December 2009. He came in. We have to remember he came in only having been an assistant, which is really unbelievable. You were very supportive. You wrote at the time, you said, I prefer a young, forward-thinking coach who has lots of potential to just bringing in like a journeyman like Max Allegri or Carlo Ancelotti. God love Mr. Carlo, though.
He's
Come back
great,
to
man.
us, Carlo. But what do we know about him when he came in? We knew he was very driven, obsessive. You've talked about that. This was a gent, who famously and almost bizarrely thought it was fine to bring his own physical therapist to the hospital when his wife was giving birth, so he could get some rehab work in himself on the side, which is just mind blowing. He gave an interview in 2014, just before being named Arsenal's captain, when he talked about, almost like a child talking about a career in the future that his team would play. When he was a manager, his team would play expressive, entertaining football. that they dictate the game, that they take the initiative, that they entertain people. That's all we knew. But he took over this squad. We have to remember, I mean, these were the days when we used to joke that Arsenal, we weren't clear Stan Kroenke actually knew he owned Arsenal. It may have just been a rounding error on the accounts of the Kroenke Empire. That squad was log-jammed with deadwood. Mustafi, Kolasinac, Lacazette, Pepe. I remember the stat that Arsenal had paid Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang something like $800,000 per shot on target after he signed Dating. I'm old enough to remember the beginning of the 2021-22 season, Andrew. First 3 games of the season, all woeful losses in their own way. Hashtag Arteta out. Massive. That was everywhere. The volume was at 11. Arteta was like a drowning man, like Emery had been a drowning man before him. Was this, how do you understand it? Was this the same guy that we know and love and admire today? Or did something change inside of him in the midst of all that adversity?
I think was the same guy, to be honest. He always took responsibility for it. Those first 3 games of the season where lost to Brentford, lost to Man City, lost to Chelsea, and then there was an international break. So then you have 2 weeks of obsessing over, well, it's 3 games, we're bottom of the table, we've conceded X amount of goals, this is awful, right? But I think crucially, he fully believed in what he was doing, and I think the club fully believed in what he was doing. And that was evident in the recruitment that summer, because like the previous summer was Willian. I have little to say about that. In an abject world, it's best for me not to speak too much on that decision, right? But then the next summer, you've got Aaron Ramsdale, Ben White, Takahiro Tomiyasu, Nuno Tavares, Albert Sambi Lokonga, and Martin Odegaard all arrived, all between 22 and 24. They didn't all work out. 4 out of 6 is still a pretty good strike rate in that regard. And what it showed was that something was going on like lessons had been learned from previous recruitment decisions, and lessons had been learned about what the team needed. More defensive solidity, but also a bit more in terms of creativity. So you bring in Martin Odegaard. I think he fully believed. Like, the Arteta out thing obviously was doing the rounds, but it wasn't like every single Arsenal fan wanted Mikel Arteta out. There were some, and there are some to this day, who remain unconvinced. Like, I've seen comments today after Arsenal lost their first game of the season, and Mikel Arteta is clueless and has no idea what he's doing. But that's the world we live in terms of online football discourse, right? That's the way it goes. Crucially, at that moment in time, he knew he had the full support of the club. And I think that allowed him to steadily get the ship steadied and go on and improve over the course of that season. And what was so interesting about that season, Rog, was every time Arsenal did something good, he would say, that's fine, but we've done nothing yet. We got to keep going. You build on this, you build on the platform, you build on what you do. He does not let people rest on their laurels in any way. And that includes him. So I think that demanding nature is just part and parcel of who he is.
Yeah, I think if anyone is saying Arteta out right now, it can only be his wife, who still probably is utterly haunted by the sight of the experience of trying to give birth, which anyone who's witnessed it in their lifetime just knows how remarkable a moment it is. Just incredibly beautiful, incredibly excruciating, and looking over at her husband and his trainer just doing jumping jacks and squats on the floor alongside her.
It was probably Pilates, much more calming and relaxing, I'd say.
I can imagine him actually doing like a really hot, I'd like to do hot yoga, just deciding fucking turning the temperature up to 110. Me. But, last year's, it was youthful, as you say. It was joy-filled until it wasn't campaign. It did. It felt. I felt like I was watching in real time. Just Homer the Odyssey, Virgil the Aeneid, Arteta's Arsenal, and we got to say rationally, you would have bitten my arm off for second place before the season. So many pre-season pundits predicted that your club would finish outside the top 4. For what would have been the 7th straight season, we need to acknowledge. Yes, spoiler alert, haters, we know it ended with a wilt. But I've got to be honest, as a neutral, I think I made this very clear. I looked on humanly at that transformation of that squad, of that club, of that fan base. And none more than the pride it brought back to the supporters, Andrew, the Arsenal supporters, the noise it coaxed out of the Emirates, an unrecognisable place now. Is that perhaps Arteta's greatest achievement? Just the positive vibes, the hope, the joy, the noise, the cacophony.
Yeah, the connection. The fans feel connected to the club again, and they felt distant from it. They felt disenfranchised. It's hard to explain, how fractious things were towards the end of the Arsene Wenger era. Like, it was divisive. It was, people were in camps. The sense was that the owners did not care about the club, and we were suffering because of that, because of the decisions they were and weren't making. And, I was at games where people were just so quick to get angry because that was the overriding emotion a lot of the time. There was just no faith that the club was going in the right direction, and from the start, Arteta has talked about connecting with the fans, and he couldn't do that for a long time. It was basically a season behind closed doors. How much that impeded the progress, it's impossible to say at this point. But I think if part of what you're trying to do is reconnect the club and the fans, is basically impossible when there's no fans in the stadium. And the Emirates is a different place now. It's a much happier place. The support is, it's tangible, to be in there. I was there for quite a few games last season, and it's a happy place. People are happy. They walk in happy. They walk out happy. And that is, I don't know, is that as much as you can ask from football? But it's certainly a lot better than walking up, wondering what's going to happen, who's going to play, how bad it's going to be, and then you walk away angry. And look, that in itself is part of football, because you chat with your mates, you go to the pub afterwards, you have a few pints, you thrash all the problems of the football club out, you have all the solutions. Everyone knows how to fix it. You just, don't have the influence at the top level in order to make all those changes. You just need to get a new manager and 22 new players and new owners. That's all it is, But it is a much happier environment, and I think that works two ways. I think the team feeds off that in as much as the fans feed off the team as well. And that's important, the 12th man and all that kind of stuff. But there is an element of that's true. And I think that has manifested itself more than once at the Emirates over the last couple of years.
To this season quickly, Andrew, and in the press conference before the Bournemouth match last weekend, a reporter asked Arteta if we could take it for granted that Arsenal's starting goalkeeper will have a surname that begins with a letter R. Aaron Ramsdale, you talk about the team and the fans having a reinforcing relationship. A lot of it actually was conducted by Aaron Ramsdale on the field, such a talismanic member of the squad. All those intangibles suddenly dropped with very little warning this season below Raya on the team sheet for Premier League games and in the Champions League midweek. Ramsdale, the man who started all 38 Premier League games last season, keeping 14 clean sheets along the way. Got to be said, erratic at times down that dark stretch. Though truthfully, I think you've said this on your show, it's hard to pinpoint what, if anything, he'd done wrong this season, and you watch closer than I do. But how do you understand this? This fiddling, how Arteta, in search of pet-like perfection, is trying to walk a line between ruthlessly creating a productive rivalry / damaging a player's confidence.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation, because when he brought Raya in and when he actually put Raya in the team, it was before the Everton game, and afterwards he went on this big long spiel about, why shouldn't I have two great goalkeepers? There have been times I've thought about subbing a goalkeeper. Why shouldn't you sub a goalkeeper? Well, nobody ever does it. There's probably a good reason, right? And he was so adamant that this was about competition that in some ways I think he's made a rod for his own back with it, because it appears at this moment in time as if it's been a changing of the guard rather than competition. I'm sure he's very happy to have two very good goalkeepers, but can he hang on to two very good goalkeepers for very long? I'm not 100% sure, because at some point Aaron Ramsdale, who could play for basically any Premier League team, is going to say, well, thanks very much, but I need to go and play football. I want to play football. I don't want to stay here. It's this curious one where maybe at this moment in time, in my opinion, the difference between Raya and Ramsdale is not really worth the distraction and the money and the potential issue that it might cause in the dressing room, because Ramsdale's a very popular guy. He's also a very popular guy with the fans, and I think this is what's really interesting to me, is that you hear the word ruthless with Mikel Arteta a lot. He might even use it himself, and people will say there's no room for sentimentality in football. If you want to get better, you've got to make tough decisions. Somebody's going to lose. But a lot of what Mikel Arteta has built has been based on not sentimentality, but on emotion and on connection. And Ramsdale has been a big part of that. He is somebody who the fans really connected to, perhaps out of a touch of guilt, because when it was reported that Arsenal were going to sign Aaron Ramsdale, I don't know that there were loads of people going, yes, let's bring in Aaron Ramsdale. There was a lot of like, well, this guy gets relegated all the time. What are we doing going after him? But he came in and proved his worth, and people really like/love Aaron Ramsdale. And there's room and time, I suppose, for this situation to become a bit more fluid over the course of the season. But I feel sorry for him, having played 38 Premier League games last season, doing a lot to help Arsenal back into the Champions League, and he's not even getting the Champions League games. I thought when they brought Raya in, we were going to see a domestic keeper/cup keeper type scenario, which we've seen at other clubs and we've seen at Arsenal down the years. Ramsdale's not even getting the Champions League games, and I feel a bit sorry for him, and I don't know that this is a sustainable situation unless Ramsdale gets some genuine playing time, and that's going to be very interesting to see, how that plays out over the course of the next couple of months.
God, it is a very, I mean, you talk about the emotion versus the ruthlessness of Arteta, and Aaron Ramsdale came on our show last season, and he talked about the emotion of Arteta. He said, you don't know what it's like to play this game and have a manager that's constantly just on standing the whole game going manic. He's like, you look over at Mikel and you just dial it back up to 11. Like, this is a deeply emotional human being. And part of me, it's like an odd, very rough parallel, but almost to Pep Guardiola. But he did it almost immediately. First thing he walked into Manchester City and kind of shot Joe Hart, who was the big personality on Manchester City's team, as a signal to the rest of the team. But I mean, again, on your podcast, I think last night, you were ruminating, what had Ramsdale done that had led to this change? That's that's the almost unfathomable thing. But we are 4 seasons in to the Arteta experience, and this is a moment when he's also finally found the password to the Kroenke bank account. I mean, part of these decisions maybe because he's been backed financially. The pressure is on him, considerably backed. Brought in players like Raya, like Leandro Trossard, a man who looks like Pete Davidson. If Pete Davidson had never discovered Tinder. You've got Kai Havertz. What is a Kai Havertz for? Is a podcast in its own right that we could spend hours discussing. But also, the gent who we've marvelled at already, blockbuster summer signing Declan Rice, who I admire so bloody much. As you watch this 2023 Arsenal, what have you seen in the play, the mentality, the tactical tweaks that feels not just different to last season, but that is evidence of lessons learned?
That's a really good question. I suppose the ability to, like when Arsenal were winning a lot of games last season, they played very well a lot of the time. This time around, we've won games and haven't necessarily played well a lot of the time. Like I think from every performance bar, perhaps the Bournemouth one, Arsenal fans will have some questions or talking points or discussion points about how the team is set up. I think there have been some issues with injuries, of course, some absences, tactical decisions at the start of the season to play Thomas Partey at right back. I'm not sure that was entirely tactical, in as much as there were rumours about Saudi interest in Gabriel, which might have been part of the reason why he was on the sidelines. Betting in new players like Rice, like Havertz, injury to Jurriën Timber in the first game of the season, which was really, really unfortunate as well, because that's a guy who could have added a lot to the back four over the course of the games that we've already played. And like you say, the Kai Havertz question: what exactly does Mikel Arteta want from him as a midfielder? Whatever it is, I'm pretty sure he's not getting it yet. It might come. It might come in time, but you know, the longer it goes on, the more people are going to have questions about that, and worries that transfer might not come to fruition. And look, you can't win every transfer. You don't win them all. Some of them don't work out. But that piece in particular of the transfer puzzle was such a big one because of how important Granit Xhaka was, not just as a player, but also the personality he brought to that dressing room. And at the moment, it feels like he and Havertz are kind of polar opposites in that regard. Xhaka was a very forceful personality. Havertz feels a little bit more introverted. And he's also got to replace a Granit Xhaka that scored 7 goals and made 9 assists, or 9 goals and 9, I can't remember, 7 goals, 7, whatever it is. 14 goal contributions. Yeah, he did really
did
well.
More than pity penalties, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, you know, I thought that was a lovely moment, to be honest. I really did. I thought it spoke to something about the team and the culture and the team spirit that's been what's the word? Cooked up, if you like, that they recognize that they've got a teammate who needs something, and they gave it to him, and they were hoping that it would pay dividends. It didn't the other night in the Champions League.
I hope it does this weekend. I really do. I hope I hope there's a deep tie between what, you know, many haters laughed at. You saw the genuine response of the team, the way they celebrated with him. Like, the relief was collective, the joy was collective, getting that media narrative off his back.
Yeah, it was. You know, he needed it, but he needs to do more as well. You know, he needs to deliver more in terms of his own performances and what he brings to the team. And, you know, like I said, I'd be really curious to know exactly what Arteta wants from him in this midfield position. There will come a point, if it doesn't happen, he's going to have to think about alternatives and think about other players in the squad who might come in and do that. And, you know, there's a certain Emile Smith-Rowe who's knocking on the door a little bit again, which is great to see, because, you know, he's another player that the fans have really connected with, and he's had a difficult time. He's come through it. He's back, and he's beginning to knock on the manager's door in the substitute appearances he's making. He's almost producing goals and assists, you know, so there are options available to Arteta in that regard. But just to sort of go back to your question about tactically what the team is, what's different, maybe there's a little less risk taking, a bit more controlled possession, rather than sort of dynamic gung-ho, let's go forward and see what happens with this. And that sort of makes the football a little less exciting. But perhaps that's what Arteta wants, because that control can allow you, if you can couple that control with a bit more attacking fluidity, a bit more attacking verve, you can score the goals, and then you can just control the game and, as we said earlier, make the opposition suffer, step on their necks, you know, stifle them. And that becomes the sort of football that you can produce on a regular basis.
I want to close by looking ahead to the goals for this season, and then this game in particular. But I got to say, Arsenal's run for the title, it ended week 37 last campaign, that 1-0 loss to Nottingham Forest. Someone started tying sky blue ribbons on the Premier League trophy with a week to go. But on the final day of the season, with the title lost, you wrote something beautiful. You wrote the sun was shining as you walked to the Emirates. The crowd kept singing, we nearly won the league. And I love what you wrote on that day, Andrew. Arteta talked about bringing success and trophies to the club, but also to enjoy the journey and the company. Who am I to argue with him? And Andrew, it's got to be acknowledged that is not the default mindset for football supporters, and it's probably not the default mindset for Mikel Arteta. Um, how did you get there, Andrew? What is it about you that brings a sense of compassion fused with that eternal hope?
I suppose just the reality of what you're facing when it comes to Manchester City. You know, who they are, who's in charge, how they've been built, what resources they have. And look, I don't want to go into the nuts and bolts of the finances or anything else, but the reality is that they are basically the best team in the world, have been for a long time, and probably will continue to be that until Pep Guardiola decides to go somewhere else. And even then, they'll replace him with another brilliant manager who will have a lot of money to spend. So you're basically seeking perfection to outdo them. And perfection is extremely, extremely difficult to achieve. It really is. And if your enjoyment of football or your football season is entirely dependent on winning a trophy at the end of it, like every football fan, you would just say, what's the point? Because most football fans don't experience that. Most football clubs don't experience that. Football exists. I want to win trophies. I think Arsenal as a football club have standards that they should meet and a history that demands success and demands trophies. And I think that kind of a culture within a football club is absolutely vital if you want to succeed. Like every game has got to be important. Every minute of every game has got to be important. And I think that's what Arteta has tried to instill at Arsenal. But there's still 11 blokes and maybe a few blokes off the bench, and they're human, and mistakes happen, and games will get lost, and you'll do silly things and all the rest of it. So for me, it's trying to enjoy what I can enjoy about football. Maybe I'm a bit mellower in my old age and all the rest of it, but I think you have to be realistic about what you're fighting against. Like, I think if this was a league without Manchester City in it, and you were fighting against this current iteration of Manchester United and Tottenham and Liverpool, taking nothing away from Liverpool, who pushed City so hard for so long, they were a brilliant team, their very best under Jurgen Klopp, an absolutely brilliant team. But wouldn't the Premier League be a much more competitive environment? Or
You
would
just
it?
made me so excited.
Or
Andrew,
would
I
it
think
go?
I think we should start a Super League. We should back a Super League, and that Super League should only have Manchester City in it. Just go on, off you pop. Go into your own league, because that league you've just described: Arsenal, Tottenham, Manchester United, Liverpool, Everton, maybe Chelsea. Get them in there. I've just
Aston
snuck
Villa.
Everton in there with no evidence for any reality. But that, oh my God, who would not want that? I've also just realised, listening to you, that there is a chance Kai Havertz in the mid-season they're going to rip his mask off. It's going to be Chelsea have sent you Willian again, just
Not
on the
another one.
cheeky side. But yeah, it was you all the time again, Willian. But in that realm, what is the goal for this year? Because after the last campaign, your sporting director, member of the Invincibles, Edu, he said, in the past, we celebrated fourth place, the third. Today, we are frustrated with the second. And after that close call that made you dream, what does this side, what is success? Is Edu's framing, is that words or is that real? Will anything less than the Premier League title, will it be anything more than his words, just another frustration?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think that has to be the culture within the football club, right? That has to be like we've made progress. We finished eighth, and then fifth, and then second, and the next step is first, right? That has to be the culture inside the club, to win, to go one better, to beat Manchester City or beat whoever it is to the title and lift the trophy. I think that, it's intrinsic in the best clubs and the best teams that this will to win has to exist from top to bottom of a football club, but not least within the playing squad itself, and the ambition and the drive you have to have. I don't think those are just words. I think those are words that they are using to try and drive themselves on. for me, again, look, I'd love to see us win it. I'd love to see us win something this year. But the Premier League, it's 20 years since the Invincibles. Wouldn't it be fitting to win the title after all those years? Absolutely. But maybe when you are dealing with the reality of Manchester City, maybe the reality of where you are is not plateau, but a sort of consolidation of your position within the top four. I'm not saying that's all I want. Of course it's not. But, when you make progress, the next thing maybe is to just stay there. And then maybe you kick on again in another season or whatever it is. But let's be honest, the jumps from 8th to 5th and from 5th to 2nd are so much easier than the jump from 2nd to 1st.
Yeah,
So much easier.
after that Spurs result, in the afterglow, I called up Michael Cohen, not that one, my Arsenal supporting mate, and he mused in that with that bitter taste of the draw in his mouth. He said, "We are so good, but Manchester City," your point, Andrew, he said, "Manchester City making mockery of Premier League competition." I think that's a direct quote. He said, "Arsenal stand more of a chance of winning the Champions League in a knockout competition this season than the Premier League." Is there some truth in that?
Yeah, I think so. You'd need some luck of the draw.
It's crazy, isn't it?
You need to avoid, any team with Jude Bellingham in it, for example. But it might be, it might be a case that the Champions League is potentially more achievable, even though it's extremely difficult. I'm not saying it's easy or anything like that. But maybe if you get through your group and you get a kind draw and you get another kind draw and then you have the game of your lives in the semi-final, and then who knows what can happen in a one-off game, right?
God, I wish that for you.
I wish that for me as well. I wish that for all Arsenal fans.
I wish that for you. That is your version of 17th place for me, and I wish that upon you absolutely. Completely that joy. I'm going to ask you about how you imagine this game is going to go, but I do want to acknowledge what you built with Arseblog, because it is rare and it is wonderful and it's so deeply nourishing. When I spend a lot of time just savouring your work, I think it's magnificent. It's really rooted very much, obviously, in the Fever Pitch vibes. Fever Pitch, the second best Arsenal-related book of all time, right behind Mesut Ozil's Gunning for Greatness. And Nick Hornby wrote, "Few of us have chosen our clubs. They've simply been presented to us." But you didn't come from a multi-generational Gunners family. Your dad, who worked in West London, I think he dabbled in Fulham. Is probably, occasional supporting Fulham is probably the way of saying it. Even enjoyed watching Spurs legend Jimmy Greaves, which is sacrilegious for most Arsenal fans to even talk about. Your brother, the mug smasher, like my own brother Nige, total bastard, a Liverpool supporter. But there's an Irish lad. You were drawn to the Irishman in Arsenal starting 11 back then, Liam Brady. Just, if you don't know who he is, American fans, Google Liam Brady now. Michael Cohen actually named at least 2 children after Liam Brady, maybe 3. That's how great he was.
This is my brother Liam. This is my other brother Liam.
Yeah, why not? I think one's Liam and one's Brady, and whatever Liam Brady's middle name is, I think he got that one. David O'Leary, Frank Stapleton. But I got to know this. Have you ever questioned, have you ever doubted your choice of club? Because you did have so many growing up in Ireland. Can you quantify, I guess is what I'm asking, can you quantify what you've gotten from this choice of club? What they've given to you as a deeply passionate, committed supporter and a community builder through Arseblog?
Well, I don't remember choosing. I don't remember actively choosing to be an Arsenal fan. I just have been for as long as I can remember. And the thing about Arsenal having all those Irish players back then was I was an Irish kid growing up in the UK, and we were told by mum and dad, "You're Irish. You might have been born here. You might talk with a thick Yorkshire accent at this moment in time, but you're Irish." So you're seeking connection. I love football, and I think just, reading football magazines, Shoot and Roy of the Rovers and all that kind of stuff. And you see a club that's got Liam Brady, David O'Leary, Frank Stapleton, John Devine, Pat Rice, Sammy Nelson, Pat Jennings. They were Irish as far as I was, they're from Northern Ireland. I don't want to start any grief here, but, it was all green as far as I was concerned, right? So Arsenal was an Irish club. And I think, it's the only explanation I have as to why I'm an Arsenal fan. My dad brought me and my brother to see Hull City quite a lot when we lived in that part of the world. I'm sorry, Hull City fans, but there wasn't much about fourth division Hull City and Tony Norman in goal that sucked me in. So it was Arsenal all the way. I mean, I started the website 20 years ago. If I had no idea where it would go and what it would do and what an influence it would have on my life. If I had been, God knows what would have happened if I supported another club or another team. But it's been an incredible journey, to write and talk about this team and to have the privilege now when I'm sitting here talking to you for that basically to be my full-time job is just unthinkable. Never could have considered the notion of it when I was a kid, not even when I started the website. And to be able to connect with Arsenal fans around the world in an era where football has become absolutely global. I'm an Irish guy who started a website about a London team while I was living in Barcelona in Spain. So I'm sort of really open to this idea that Arsenal is for everyone. Is the experience the same as somebody who grew up on Holloway Road? No, it's not. But football fans love their football clubs regardless of where they come from in the world. And I think the bit about Arseblog that makes me happiest and most proud is the fact that we have an audience from all over the world to whom the website and the podcast is like a connection to the club. And most of those people will never get a chance to go to London, to go and watch a game, to sit in the seats, to walk through the concourses, to have that moment where you come up the stairs and you see the pitch and it's just glorious. So that I think is just the greatest privilege, is to be that part of that connection that people have to the football club that they support with all their hearts.
What have you learned about life? I mean, you've done this in great times. You've seen fire and you've seen rain through Arseblog. I mean, sunny days hopefully will be yours again. But what have you learned about life by being the centre of that? I mean, for those who aren't familiar, the thing I admire about it, Arsenal the fan base has been quite toxic. At times, it's been quite hysterical and knee-jerk at times. Arseblog has been consistently emotionally intelligent and very, very human in good times and in bad. What have you learned about life and that 20 years being the centre of that community?
That football is a wonderful, mad, passionate, crazy, unpredictable, frustrating, maddening, hilarious, ridiculous pastime. But at the heart of it, it's the people that matter and the people that make the difference. And I've made friends through this website. I've met wonderful bald people like you, and those are the things that really matter. And if you can step back and objectively assess the sporting aspect of it, there's still so much to enjoy, that even in difficult times, like I sat in the new camp in the pissings of rain watching Arsenal get battered by Barcelona. That's not fun, but it was also great fun because I was with my mates, and then we went and we had some beers and we talked about it. And those things are just so important. And those are the things that maybe beyond the successes on the pitch are the things that I will cherish the most because they're closest to me, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. I mean, you just put into words what so many of us feel, ultimately why so many of us do what we do, supporting terrible, terrible football teams. But last question, Andrew, you've been so bloody generous with your time. What's your prediction for Arsenal City? Will this be the moment that the pupil beats the teacher when Mikel Arteta's peace-loving shale in Monkcade finally snatches a pebble from Master Pep's hand?
I'm really terrible at predictions because I'm like, at heart, I'm just a big optimist. I'm like, of course we can do it. Of course. Yeah, no problem. What's the hassle? We can go and we can play well.
You're Eddie and Ketch's team now.
Yeah, exactly. Little Eddie. I do have a feeling Arsenal are going to get something from this game. I'm not sure if it's going to be all 3 points, but famous last words. I think we will get something from this game.
I need the score prediction.
Oh,
I do. Just
okay.
legally.
Legally, if I'm legally obliged, 2-1 Arsenal. Why not? I could be stupid. This could come back to haunt me. But hey, that's how I'm feeling today.
Oh, it is known. Andrew Mangan, you are an incredible human being. I've got to say, I don't think anyone can listen to this, even a Spurs fan, without wishing you, your community, and even your bloody team just joy and wonder. You are that nourishing. Listen to Arsecast. Follow Andrew at Arseblog on every single platform. Support this gentleman. Just engage in his community of wonder. Andrew, I don't take it for granted being with you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Courage.